Syndicated Source Material.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first episode of Syndicated Source Material. So I'm your host, Jesse Starcher. I normally host the Source Material Comics podcast here on the Radulich In Broadcasting Network, a division of the W2M Network. And lately, because of the coronavirus, I have been very essential to my actual job. So that it minimizes the opportunity for myself to do podcasts. Right now, what I've decided is that I'm going to release what I'm going to call syndicated source material. Here's the thing. With W2M Net, the Radulich In Broadcasting Network came on board when I was about 150 episodes in on source material. So there's a lot of content that our listeners here on this network have not had the opportunity to listen to, especially some of the earlier stuff. So my thought is, since I cannot participate in some more recent podcasts, I do have time on Sundays to edit. Here is what I'm going to do. I'm going to edit 26 episodes of source material. I want to have them all ready in the can to go. So by the time you hear this, for the next year, every other Saturday, you're going to get treated to episodes 1 through 26 of source material. Now, the good thing is that I've taken the time to go through and edit these podcasts, and my early days of editing, obviously, I have learned a lot over the years on creating a nice, tight podcast. And a lot of those earlier episodes definitely could use some touch-ups. These are podcasts that were recorded on the ill-fated Blogtalk Radio Radulich In Broadcasting Network. Some of them I edited myself and put up, but when I got to the live show using the switchboard, there were some hiccups earlier on. And when you're going live, you just don't know what you're going to run into. This also gets our source material archive onto the W2M network. The plan is to do 26 of these, and every other Saturday you should have a new syndicated source material in the feed for you to check out. And we're going to start out with episode 1 right here is Punisher Circle of Blood.
Hello, everyone. It is I, Radulich In Broadcasting superfan Jesse Starcher, here to bring you this inaugural and hopefully ongoing comic book podcast titled Source Material. So let me give you an idea how this show started. I'm going to peel back the curtain a little bit and give you an idea where source material came from. A while back, Mark Radulich, the patriarch of the Radulich In Broadcasting Network, was talking about how he was reading Green Lantern Rebirth. I had pitched the idea that, hey, why don't you go ahead, why don't you guys, you, Gavin, and Sean, do a podcast on that book? And then they kind of hem and hawed, they talked about it for a little bit. Nothing came about it though. So I pitched that idea, and it kind of stewed with me for a little bit. So I said, well, you know what? Maybe there's an opportunity for me to kind of step in and do something similar to that. I'm cutting my podcast teeth here, and that's why, bear with me, because it's a learning experience for me. This is my first ever podcast that I'm doing by myself. That's for sure, unless you want to count the 10 minutes that Teasley fell asleep on me in the Mortal Kombat cast. But I'm doing this one by myself, and it's listening to a guy like Robert Winfrey do Everyone Loves a Bad Guy live. It takes a pretty good skill set to do that. So I'm cutting my teeth, and I'm trying here, so bear with me. Do your best to bear with me anyway. So I thought, well, there's kind of a niche for the Radulich In Broadcasting Network to have a comic book related show. I mentioned Robert Winfrey. He did a series of comic book villains that he covered on Everyone Loves a Bad Guy. That kind of resonated with me. I was like, man, we need to have something on here that is, very, very similar. So what I want to do with this show is I want to read like a story arc or a graphic novel, summarize it as quick as I can, because trust me, this is the third time that I've done this podcast. The first time the podcast was like 70-some minutes long, and I think that was just covering the 5 issues. I want to summarize it for you and do my best not to read it to you, but to, not to make this an audio book, but to give you an idea of a short idea of what happened in each issue and the coverage of the plot of the whole thing. I'm not going for the big books that are out there, although those will be on the agenda, trust me. But I'm going to pick stuff could be absolutely outside of the realm of blockbuster to some of the great stuff. This one I'm covering today has a lot of sentimental value to me. The graphic novel I'm covering is actually a collection of the first 5 issues of the Punisher, I should say the only 5 issues of the Punisher Limited series that came out in 1986. The trade is the first ever trade that I ever bought. So what I plan on doing is giving you an idea of what happened in the trade. I'd also like to give you my thoughts and if I'd recommend it to you or not. I do plan on doing a live episode every once in a while, especially if it's going to be requested. If I want to have a guest I want to talk, which by golly, I do want to have guests, so it might hopefully be a lot more live shows. But October 6th, I plan on bringing a guest on. Crossing my fingers, he'll come on and he'll talk. On my first live show, we'll be talking Infinity Gauntlet, the 6-issue series there. Now, let me go ahead and get into why the Punisher, why the Circle of Blood. I mentioned how it was a sentimental coverage of this story. This is the first trade I ever got. Just a little bit of a background on it. I went with it was the 90s. I think it was possibly 1990. I mean, this book has a copyright of 1988, so I think it had to have been 89 or 90. But anyway, my stepdad took me to Gettysburg, and he's a big Civil War buff. So it was a pretty cool, it was definitely a cool experience. But while we were there, I begged him, can we go to a Punisher store? Can we go to a comic book store and see see if there's anything there? And of course he took me. I found this graphic novel sitting there and, ended up buying it. Took it home, and I remember sitting there in the hotel room, couldn't wait to read it before I went to bed. It's kind of, I've had it ever since then. So this is a 24-year-old graphic novel, and it's a great, I say 24, it's 26, it's going from 1988. So anyway, it holds a good bit of sentimental value for me there. But let me go ahead and get into what this series is about. It's called The Circle of Blood. It is the collection of the first 5 issues of the Punisher Limited series. It came out it was released in 85. I think the cover of the first issue is January of 86. But the way that works is they're usually on store shelves like a couple months before that date. So anyway, I think this was December of 85, late 85, 1986. They put a 5-issue miniseries out of the Punisher. Now the Punisher prior to this was a villain. He was a character with villainous tendencies and made appearances throughout different books. To give you the Punisher's origin just real quickly, the Punisher is an ex-Marine by the name of Frank Castle, served in Vietnam. He came home to live with his family, and when he was living with his family, a wife, a son, and a daughter, they decided to go to do a picnic in Central Park in New York. Okay, they get caught in the crossfire between 2 rival gangs. This is rival crime organizations, because it wasn't, I say gangs, and we're not talking about the Bloods and the Crips. We're talking about, crime organizations, the mob, and whatever you want to call. But they all, the whole family gets gunned down. Frank is the only one that lives. He wakes up with a taste for vengeance and becomes the Punisher. Okay. The cover of this graphic novel, I posted it a couple times on there, on Facebook. It's got the Punisher, he's unloading an Uzi, it looks like, and, the caps are flying out of the top of the gun, and then the background of it is Jigsaw. Now, Jigsaw is, I'll get into his origin a little bit later, but he's one of the main villains in the Punisher's rogues gallery. So when I first bought this book, I'm thinking, oh man, it's going to be a great, pitting against, Punisher being pitted against against Jigsaw. And they're going to have it out, but not the case. And you'll find out here later. So let me give you the credits of the book here, okay? The plot was done by Stephen Grant, and he does the first 4 issues. Joe Duffy does the last issue, the 5th issue. Pencils is done by Mike Zeck, first 4 issues, and Mike Vosberg, the last and 5th issue. Ink's done by John Beatty. I jumped on Wikipedia. I could see Mike Zeck definitely had a little, pretty decent career doing a lot of different books. But this right here, this is kind of Stephen Grant's claim to fame. This is the first thing you see when you look up Stephen Grant. Okay, now in the front of the book, they have a little bit of a foreword there by Carl Potts, who was the editor at the time. And, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but it's interesting because Carl paints the Punisher as someone like a Charles Bronson in Death Wish, where if he can take out some of the criminals, great. If he gets killed while taking these criminals out, it doesn't matter to him, because at that point in time he'd be with his family. So he paints him as like a criminal killer with a death wish. And I can kind of see that. That's our intro. We'll go ahead and get into issue 1 here and talk a little bit about, start breaking down these next 5 issues. Alright, part 1 of Circle of Blood. So we open up, Frank Castle, the Punisher, is back in Rikers. They've caught the police have caught him, and he's a prisoner now. What we see there, brief summary of the issue. They do a bit of retconning, and you find out that there were drugs that made the Punisher insane, which they attributed to his villainous acts prior to these issues. Obviously, when the Punisher first came out, he was a villain, and this right here is their way of kind of saying, okay, well, yeah, he was a villain, but this is why. And it turns out, while Frank was in prison, he was being drugged and became partially insane and escaped, and then became the Punisher. So anyway, he finds out that the person that did the drugging was a guy by the name of Jigsaw. Now, Jigsaw is one of Frank's sworn enemies. Frank had thrown him through a window at one point, messed his face up so bad that it looked like a jigsaw puzzle. Therefore, Jigsaw took on the name Jigsaw. He goes and confronts Jigsaw. There's a fight. And of course, he has some good fights on the way there to do it. And then after everything kind of calms down, he finds out that there's an escape being planned. And so Frank decides, after his confrontation with Jigsaw, to side kind of with the criminals. He's going to go with them and help, or go with them as they escape. Well, the criminals, on the night of the escape, decide to try to kill Frank, and Frank was smart enough to understand that he was going to be double-crossed, and made a bulletproof vest out of a mattress. So he lives, but while the whole prison is trying to escape, he decides against it and goes to a tower to grab a shotgun, and he's going to start picking off the criminals as they're trying to make their way across the yard. So Frank gets up there, tries to start killing him. He realizes that Jigsaw and another guy went to the warden's office, and so he follows them, and he finds out that they've taken the warden and the warden's 8 hostages. Jigsaw and Don Corvello is the name of the other criminal. Of course, Frank jumps in there, saves the day. The warden explains to Frank that he's a member of the Trust, and that he would like the Punisher to join them. The Trust is an organization that is upset with how the country is being overtaken by crime, and that politicians can't do anything, cops aren't being able to do anything, so they want to enlist the Punisher to come in and train or become part of the Trust. So Frank agrees to do that. What the warden says, well, hey, we can't give you a pardon, but we can maybe make sure that you escape tonight. Again, Frank agrees, and the warden has everything laid out there for him. His signature black pants and the skull shirt, the white gloves. Frank puts on the costume, and the next issue title pops up, Back to the War. Now, the ending of the issue introduces us to a guy by the name of Tony Macera. Tony is a young kid. He's a med school student, but he's been brought in by his uncle. His uncle was a gangster type. We find out that Tony's dad was killed by the Punisher. Tony's dad was a criminal, and the Punisher messed him up bad enough that there had to be a closed coffin. So Tony's uncle says, why don't you take this gun and avenge your father? And Tony, he's on the straight and narrow, but has decided, you know what? You're right. I'm going to try and I'm going to kill the Punisher. And so we end the issue with Tony screaming he's going to kill the Punisher. And that's the end of issue. That's the end of issue 1. Okay. Issue 2, Back to the War. It opens up with the Punisher's back out on the streets. He's now been able, he's got his gear. He's got the trust backing him up. And he's going to go take out a big target. His target is the Kingpin. Now, for those of you who aren't aware of who the Kingpin is, he's a pretty big villain in the Marvel Universe. His name is the Kingpin because he's the Kingpin of crime. And so he's the top dog. Frank goes on a mission, opens right up. Frank's going right after the Kingpin, and right there jumps through a window of Kingpin's skyscraper office and attempts to kill him. Well, it turns out it's a trap. So Frank takes off running and gets out of there, realizes that, there was a body in there. It looked like the Kingpin, but it wasn't him. But anyway, Frank jumps out of the building, barely escapes with his life, falls to the ground, and is injured. Okay. Frank ends up taking responsibility for killing the Kingpin. He calls the papers because he realizes that people believe the Kingpin's dead. So he calls, takes responsibility, and says, yeah, I'm the one that killed him. Go ahead and print it. So the papers start printing that the Punisher's killed the Kingpin. Now, Punisher's angle here is to start a gang war. He believes that if he can get all the criminals vying for that top spot, you're going to start seeing criminals start killing criminals. And that's less work for Frank Castle to do, take care of. He's basically going to try and start a gang war. We're also introduced to Angela. She's the one who helps the Punisher after he falls to the ground injured. Her and the Punisher kind of become a thing. She helps him out. He says she knows who he is, and she wants him to take revenge because her family was accosted by these, gangsters at some point. We also find out that Tony Macera is tailing Frank. He's been following the Punisher, so he's been kind of keeping tabs on him. You see a couple panels there where he's watching the Punisher, and he could have the drop on him at any time, but he hasn't done so yet. So you've got that going on in issue 2. There's also a peace conference called by the gang members. They're trying, you start seeing gang members getting killed. And at first when I was reading it, I thought the Punisher's going in there and killing these gang members. And that's not the case. These gang members were killing each other. So these heads of these gangs, or the heads of these criminal organizations, were getting picked off by each other. One of them, which was actually Tony's uncle, calls a peace conference. So he gets all these gang members in this one place, all these criminal masterminds in one place. I say masterminds, but ahead of these criminal organizations to try and hash out a peace conference. And the Punisher's there. He's not going to jump him. He's just going to watch and see what happens. And actually a hitman jumps out and starts shooting everybody in the conference. All these guys are there, and this hitman starts taking them out. While the Punisher starts trailing the hitman to try and figure out who in the world put him up to doing that. Why would somebody else be trying to kill all these guys? So he takes off, trails the hitman. They get onto a passenger train, a subway train. The hitman's taking shots at Frank, as obviously he's trying to get Punisher off his tail. The subway train's got like 3 or 4 people on there, and the hitman ends up shooting one guy and shooting him in the shoulder. So an innocent got caught in the crossfire there. He finally gets a hold of the hitman, and they fight, and he kills the hitman. And let me tell you about the way he kills this hitman. He pushes him, he gets him, basically kicks him off of him. The guy's head goes through the window of the subway train, right? And it's the door of the subway train. Just as his head goes through it, they come to a stop and the doors open. And of course it happens off panel, but you see scritch, I think is the word to describe it but his head's ripped off. His head's ripped clean off. So Frank wins, saves the day, but he turns around and he notices that the people on the subway train are scared of him. And he realizes that what's going on now is that, this gang war is maybe not such a great idea, because even though a lot of his dirty work's getting taken care of by the criminals killing each other, there's a lot of people that are getting caught in the crossfire and are getting killed also. And so he's starting to regret what's happened. So he makes his way out of the subway station, gets up gets it to his van, and gets ready to get in there, and the van explodes. The Punisher falls to the ground. So he gets up, and he calls the trust. He's like, hey, my gear's been blown up. Well, that's when we're introduced to a guy by the name of Alaric. Alaric is basically Frank's contact in the trust. And he hooks Frank up with whatever he can, gear-wise, guns, whatever. So Alaric says, yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your van. We'll get you hooked up with another one. And then in that last panel, Alaric's got the phone up to his ears, and you see Angela playing with Alaric's hair. And that's the end of it. It says the next issue is going to be called Slaughter Day. So you kind of see that Angela's hanging out with the head of the trust, so something's up there. But that's the end of issue 2. So next issue, issue 3, like I said, Slaughter Day. We find out that Angela was enlisted by the trust to kind of push the Punisher to rely on the trust. We see that Alaric has bugged Angela's house and is kind of keeping tabs on the Punisher. But their main goal is to kind of push the Punisher to rely on the trust more. Maybe just so they could, control him a little bit more. We also, in this issue, Punisher meets Tony Macera. He finally finds that Tony's surveilling the apartment and goes out and confronts Tony. Says, what's going on? And of course, Tony's just blunt and upfront and to the point and says, yeah, you killed my dad. So the Punisher says, oh yeah, I figured it was revenge, so let's go ahead and have it out right now. So Tony gets out of the car but he explains to Frank that he doesn't want to kill him right now. He will kill him, but he also wants the Punisher to kill the criminals that caused his dad to be the way he was. Punisher says, well, either way, you're a dead man. So they don't get into a fight. They don't other than that one confrontation. Tony comes out and tells him why he's been tailing him, what he wants to do. Punisher finally gets to meet Tony, but nothing ensues. Okay. We get to meet Texas. Texas is like a higher up in the trust who's kind of management, and he's visiting Alaric and kind of checking on him to see how he's doing. Just kind of a bit player here. He ain't really that big of a deal right now. But so you get the idea that Alaric is just kind of he's not the head of the trust. He's a cog in the machine, if you will. And it's a much bigger than Alaric is. We also meet a guy by the name of Marcus Coriander. Now, Marcus is the guy who who was behind the Hitman, and he's also behind the killings that's been going on here in regards to the killings of all the crime bosses. There's another peace meeting that's made, but this one is via the phone, and we find out that Marcus was somehow able to manipulate that and have that happen. So all these crime bosses did a phone conference. Well, they were all on the phone at the same time, and they all end up getting, a bunch of them end up getting killed. And what we find out is that they're being killed by these guys who dress up like the Punisher. What I call them is the Punisher Death Squad. And we find out that Marcus Coriander is the guy training these guys to go out and take out these crime bosses. The Punisher finds out about this and goes to confront Coriander, and ends up confronting him. Coriander escapes, and Punisher's trying to figure out, who is it that's behind you? Who's giving you the money to do this? Because he's looked into Coriander. Coriander's not a big crime boss. So who's giving him the money? Well, I think we have an idea of who's giving, the funding behind this. Anyway, Coriander tries to escape. In his try to escape, he ends up shooting at Frank, missing Frank, and hitting an innocent little girl. And of course, Frank is flashing back to what's caused him to become the Punisher, and he becomes that much more determined. And of course, that helps enforce the fact that he doesn't want innocents being caught in the crossfire of this gang war. And he is very upset that this has happened, obviously. So he takes off after Coriander, corners him in an alley. And we find out at that point in time, Coriander says it's Alaric. Alaric's the one who's behind all this. Just as he says that, Angela shoots Coriander in the head. Punisher turns, sees Angela, and Angela proceeds to shoot Frank in the head. And that's the end of the issue. Frank's on the ground, looks like he's shot. Angela takes off. So the next issue number 4, is called Final Solution. So opens up. Punisher's on his way out, running. So we're like, wait a second, wasn't he just shot in the last issue? We find out that he rolled with the bullet. When Angela shot him, it grazed him, and he kind of rolled so it didn't hit him full on. He played possum and let Angela think he was dead. He's trying to figure out where Alaric's at now. Now that he knows Alaric's behind all this, he's got to figure out where Alaric lives. He's only had phone conversations with him. So his idea is to go to the warden's house, because the warden is the one that first hooked him up with the trust way back in issue 1. So he heads over to the warden's house. The warden, explains to him, look, Alaric is definitely, part of the trust, and that he's been brainwashing these criminals to act like Frank or act like the Punisher, and he wants them to kill without conscience. He discloses where Alaric lives and then promptly grabs a gun. Of course, Frank thinks he's going to try and shoot at him, but he then puts the gun under his chin and pulls the trigger and blows his own brains out. Now the Punisher knows where Alaric lives, and he's going to head over that way. Well, of course, the Punisher Death Squad, is after Frank now. They've been given orders to go take care of Frank, because Frank's been, they know they're on their trail. So, I imagine Angela got to Alaric and explained what was going on. So we kind of get an idea of how, in this issue, we also get an idea of how Alaric processes these criminals. He's using gas and electroshock. Don't ask me, but they show a chamber where there's this guy laying in there, and Alaric's kind of looking on. It's this criminal who's saying his name, but then he gets shocked, and then he starts saying, I'm the Punisher. So it's showing how they process these criminals and make them think who they are. Well, okay, so Punisher's got to figure out a way to get to Alaric's house, and it immediately hits him, well, where's Tony at? Tony's been tailing him this whole time, so he ends up finding Tony, jumping in the car, and Tony, of course, is absolutely surprised, but the Punisher knew he was going to be there, and says, look, drive. Here's where we're going. So he has Tony basically take him to Alaric's palatial estate. Now, Alaric's estate, I'm going to describe this here to you real quick. It's this big mansion, all right? And it's a seaside mansion, but it's on top of this rock that juts out of the sea. Like, it has to be, 60, 70 feet up out of the sea. So there's this huge bridge that connects the mainland. And when I say huge, it's probably about, 200 yards. But it's the mainland, this 200-yard bridge connects the mainland to this huge estate that's high up on this rock. Never seen anything like it before in real life, but it's comics. You gotta suspend your disbelief. So anyway, as they're about to get to the bridge, Punisher knocks Tony out of the car, takes over, crashes the gates. Now, as they goes into the gates of of Alaric's estate, there's Punisher Death Squad members everywhere running patrol duty. Punisher starts taking some of them out. We end up, there's one point where we find that Jigsaw is one of the criminals that Alaric has brainwashed. Punisher runs into him and ends up having to hit him or something, punches him in the face, and that breaks the conditioning of the brainwashing. So Jigsaw recognizes the Punisher immediately and starts calling for everybody to shoot at the Punisher. Punisher gets pinned down, ends up escaping to another building somehow, and then right at the end of the issue, Alaric's kind of keeping tabs on him because now he knows that the Punisher's there. But as he's walking through this building, he ends up accidentally falling through this hole, or maybe it was a trap door, I don't know. But anyway, the floor comes out from under him, and he accidentally ends up in one of the conditioning chambers. So at the end of the issue, the Punisher is lying there just bloody and beaten from, trying to deal with all these Death Squad members. Now he's laying in one of the conditioning chambers. And that's the end of issue 4. Issue 5, they're just calling it, I think it was Final Solution Part 2. Now, what's strange about this series, 1 through 5, is that 1 through 4 was done by the same artists, same writer and artist. And issue 5 is totally taken over by a different artist and story writer. So, now as to why that happened, I did a tiny bit of research online, and it's not like they go into it as to why that occurs. But anyway, so it's the conclusion, though. You'd think that you'd want to keep your guys around for the conclusion of the issues, but I don't know what happened. So, summarize the issue here. The Punisher escapes the conditioning cell. Once he gets out of there, he confronts Jigsaw, and they pretty much have it out. Jigsaw lives, though. Alaric is watching all of this, and Alaric's Punisher Death Squad starts running scared. So when they start leaving, Alaric is like, okay, I'm out of here. The Punisher's here. He's scared practically an army away. I'm getting the hell out. He's in the business of trying to get the hell out of there. Well, of course the Punisher catches up with him.
after a little bit of a confrontation, I think he shoots Alaric in the shoulder, and he's got Alaric down there on the ground, and Alaric's begging for his life. You could tell the Punisher's thinking about pulling the trigger. But instead, he hands Alaric the phone, and he says, you make a phone call, and I let you live. And this is, of course, out of Frank's, this is out of character for Frank. Perhaps shows the progress that Frank's made throughout the issues. Instead of killing this guy, he's went through hell and back to corner this dude. All the stuff he had to go through to get to him, but he's finally decided, okay, I'm not going to kill him. He says, you need to make a phone call to the Daily Bugle, and you need to divulge everything about the trust. And of course he says, if you do not do it, then I'm coming back. So the Punisher leaves, and he trusts, apparently, that Alaric's going to be a man of his word, or at least is scared crapless enough to do what the Punisher says. As Frank's leaving, gets to the door to go out, and there stands Tony Macera, the man whose father was killed by the Punisher. And Tony, of course, is holding a gun, and he's decided now it's time. Frank has dispatched all these criminals. Now Tony's time for revenge has come. And he's got a gun, and he's got it pointed square at the Punisher, and the Punisher just walks up to him, and he talks him down. He makes Tony realize that vengeance is a vicious circle, and Tony has a choice to stop that circle. Because if he kills the Punisher, then maybe somebody for the Punisher comes after Tony, and then it just keeps going on and on and on. He makes Tony realize that it's not, don't continue the circle of violence. Don't continue the circle of blood. But we're not done yet. Tony, obviously just puts his gun down. Frank walks out. He realizes that now he's got to make his way home after this whole, after all this he's went through. He's now going to make his way home. Well, as he starts to cross the bridge, Angela is there. She tries to kill the Punisher by running him down. She's driving back to the house to go pick up Alaric, assuming that he was still alive, realizes that the Punisher's walking out of the house, so she's infuriated and takes off and tries to run him down. Of course, he's walking across this bridge I was talking about earlier, and she misses hitting the Punisher, ends up going through the guardrail of the bridge, and is halfway hanging off of the bridge. And she's begging, the Punisher, please help me, I want to die, I don't want to die. And just when you thought the Punisher was going good all the way, he just looks at Angela and realizes what she had done, earned his trust, and then betrayed him, and he just walks away, leaving her hanging there. And that's the end of Circle of Blood. In closing, I'll give you the good and the bad of the Punisher, Circle of Blood. Good, it's a decent story. It's not groundbreaking in any ways, but it's an okay story. In the issues, you can see that the Punisher is becoming more of a hero. And, of course, there's a good message in the book about closing a circle of blood so that it does not continue on and on and on. In the bad category, it's not extremely notable. You don't hear a lot of people, like I said, you don't really hear a whole lot of people talking about the 5-issue miniseries. Jigsaw plays a bit part in it. Really, there's no other notable villains, and it's a strange way to kind of try and put Punisher on the map. Putting him in this miniseries where there's not a whole lot going on. But again, it did its job. There are a few strange things that occurred that you can actually see in the trade that I have. But if you're an owner of the original miniseries, the books, the first 4 issues were done by the creative team, like I said, Steve Grant and Mike Zeck. They were on the first 4 issues. But for the last issue, the creative team totally changed. And I didn't understand why. It turns out the team made a pact that if one was taken off the book, the other one would follow. I guess apparently Marvel had issues where they were doing this a lot back in the 80s, where they would bring somebody on a book and then drop that person off, and or to where the artist would have to deal with something like that, or the vice versa. The scripter might have to deal with the art. There was a point where the book was looked at as being delayed, like it was way behind schedule. So they took Mike Zeck off of the book. Stephen Grant went and pleaded with the Marvel offices, look, keep them on here. Let's finish. We got to finish this up. Let them stay. But they would not reconsider. So Stephen Grant followed suit and left. And so that's why the first 4 issues of the 5-issue miniseries are the same creative team, and then the 5th is just totally somebody different. The 5th is taken up by
Joe Duffy and Michael Vosberg. So, and there's another strange thing that happens here, or that's on the issues. If you look at the covers of the 5 issues, up at the top it'll say, and on the first issue it says number 1 in a 4-issue limited series. Apparently, that's the way things were done back then, is that it was usually a 4-issue limited series if it was being released. Steve Grant and Mike Zeck, they did not want, or what they wanted to do was double-sized issue for the first issue, and then 2 and 3 were going to be regular sized, and the 4th issue was going to be a 2-parter and a double-sized issue. Well, apparently, Marvel said, no, we don't want that to happen. So they said, okay, well, no problem. We'll just have to split up our last story into 2 issues, and it's going to be a 5-issue limited series. So the next issue, or I guess when it goes to production, I guess the first issue says, number 1 in a 4-issue limited series. Well, at that point, they'd realized it was supposed to be 5. So they, I guess, get onto the production company and say, look, it's supposed to be 5, it's supposed to be 5. So issue number 2 comes out, and at the top it says number 2 in a 5-issue limited series. So they're like, great, they've got it fixed. Issue 3 drops, and all of a sudden it's back to issue 3 in a 4-issue limited series. So these guys are like, what the hell is going on? So at that time they just gave up. Issue number 4 says the same thing. Number 4 in a 4-issue limited series. So if you're a customer and you're walking in there and you're picking up this issue, you're seeing that this should be the final issue. You would think. Not the case. It ends, obviously, the 4th issue. Like I said, it ends, tune in next time. Yeah, tune in next time. Finale part 2. So, of course, the 5th issue drops, and it says number 5 in a 5-issue limited series. And apparently there was a bet going on. I was reading this off one of the websites that one of the creative team was betting with the other one. He goes, how about, how much you want to bet the 5th issue will say number 5 in a 4-issue limited series? Didn't happen. They got it right, though. Those are some of the strange things about the series. I always wondered that, and it wasn't until I did this podcast that I did a little bit of research and figured it out. What made it edgy for the 80s? There's 3 things. If you go to the Wikipedia entry, they mention, and I know I covered them here in the coverage of the book, but there's 3 things that kind of made it edgy for the 80s. For a comic book in the 80s. Obviously, the intimation, I'm taking that straight from the Wikipedia, the intimation that the Punisher had sexual relations with Angela. That was something that you kind of rarely saw in a Marvel comic. The killing of an innocent girl, that's kind of a rare thing you ever saw. It was a young girl, too. I mean, it was a kid. And then the suicide of the warden. You didn't really see too many characters or Marvel comics portraying that. So those 3 things kind of made it pretty edgy and notable for a 1980s comic. So finally, I'm going to go ahead and give you my recommendation here. Punisher Circle of Blood. First 5-issue limited series of the Punisher from late 85 to early 86. Now, I would recommend this book to those who, want to check out the early issues of The Punisher, what preceded the ongoing series. Ongoing series started in July of 87, so this is about a year and a half before that happened. To those who, if you catch any of the previous issues of The Punisher, a lot of times, like I said, he was kind of portrayed as a villain. So this series tries to kind of right that ship to where he's not a villain. He's a vigilante superhero, vigilante hero. We'll just put it that way. I do like the cover art on most of the issues. The cover art was pretty kick-ass. However, the story, it's an alright story. So, if you're interested in it, I don't know if the trade's still in print or not. I have no clue. You might be able to find it online somewhere. Purchase it off Amazon or something like that. Trade I bought, like I said, I bought it back in the 1990s, I think. But, that's my closing for it.
Thank you very much for joining us. Do not forget to subscribe to our new home by punching in W2M Network on just about any podcast platform to get all of our content into your audio feed. Also, give a like to the Radulich In Broadcasting Network and W2Mnet.com Facebook page in order to stay on top of everything that we have to offer. If you'd like to follow the Source Material Podcast on social media, just follow @SourceMatCast on Twitter, and we are on Facebook @Source Material Comics Podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please feel free to share. We look forward to entertaining you again soon.